Hi, this is Debbie, and in this video I'm going to be looking at how to watercolour curly hair. I rarely watercolour people, and when I do, it is usually images with straight glossy hair with perhaps a slight wave to it. For today's video, I'm going to be using the Rest Queen stamp set, which is a collaboration between Lydia Diaz of Clever Girl Crafting's artwork, which she uses for her stickers, and Christina Werner's lettering at Bringing Lydia's Sentiments to Life. As Lydia described herself, the Rest Queen set has 4 different natural hair beauties, bedtime essentials, and lots of affirming phrases. Not only that, but 100% of the profits from this stamp set will be donated to Therapy for Black Girls. So let's jump right into this card, and the best way to find a new skill is to set right to it and have a go. It might not be perfect, but imperfection is better than not trying. I have a block of my favourite Fabriano Artistico Extra White Cold Pressed watercolour card, and I found that the easiest way to remove a piece from the block is to tuck a palette knife under the corner of the block which doesn't have a gummed edge, and then run the knife gently around to release the gummed edges. I trimmed the watercolour card slightly to fit into a mini Misty and lined up one of the girls from the Rest Queen set roughly in the middle. When I've looked back at the cards I've made, I usually prefer the ones that are clean and simple in design, letting the focal point shine, and so I aim for that with this card. I stamped the image in antique linen distress ink with a light hand. I don't want too much ink transferred as I plan to paint this in the no-line style. I want just enough ink to be able to see where to paint, but not so much the lines difficult to incorporate. Antique linen distress ink does make this easier, as being light in colour and water reactive, it does blend and merge with the watercolours beautifully. In fact, this is the second card I made as I painted the first card, and then my last step was to draw in the face of the girl with a black marker. And I really couldn't see the antique linen lines anymore, and I messed up, and her eyes were wonky. So this time round, I drew in the key details of her face right from the start. I used a Pigment Micron pen, which is waterproof when the ink is dry. Let's get some of the supplies details out of the way. I'm using Daniel Smith paints today and a size 2 round brush. During the painting process, I used 2 similar size 2 brushes, one from Jackson's and one from Escoda, both of them with synthetic bristles. To start the curly hair watercolouring, I put down a light first layer of colour using Shadow Violet. Shadow Violet has a great range and is one of my favourite colours for adding shadows, as the name suggests, but it's also a lovely colour when diluted. The official blurb is that it becomes a grey mauve wash when added to water. A hint of orange can be seen in thin applications. However, for me, I see pinks, mauves and blues in light washes, such as I'm using here, and although I'm aiming for the look of black hair really has a multitude of colours where the light hits it, and this first layer will give the hair hints at those colours. I'm painting at real speed in this part of the video. I thought it was good to see what real speed looks like, although I will speed the video up shortly so that I can fit in all the footage. At real speed, you can see that I push the watercolour around the edges of the hair area, working those antique linen stamp lines to reactivate the ink and blend with the watercolour wash. I'll keep doing this as I paint, and slowly the ink will all but disappear. You'll see that when I come to paint the colour for her cheeks. The ovals designating her cheeks are no longer visible when I come to paint them in. My plan is to have the top of the hair in highlight with the sides darker, and so I dropped in a more concentrated mix of Shadow Violet into the sides of the hair. While the first layer of paint is still wet, you can drop in concentrated paint like this, and it will slowly mix with the lighter areas, giving a beautiful blend if left to do its own thing. Now here I started to paint the face and found that the pen I'd used to mark in the facial details wasn't quite dry yet, and I was starting to get some grey smudges. Whenever watercolouring, the best tool to have to hand at all times is a paper towel or old cloth. I use mine continuously to mop up mistakes and to take off excess water or paint off my brush. You'll see the paper towel make an appearance for a mistaken drop of colour in her hair, and also I used a clean damp brush to pull up the colour and correct the line of the hair tie, where it had gone over the edge into the hair area. This leaves a lighter line in that area, but I'll cover that up when I start to add deeper colours to the hair later on. For the hair tie, I used Perylene Violet, and for the night dress, Quinacridone Violet with accents of Perylene Violet for the heart and the ribbing around the neck. Again, my aim was for depth at the sides of the image with highlights through the centre. Now that the first layer of hair has dried, I came back in with a second layer of Shadow Violet. This is a more concentrated mix than last time, and to give that impression of curls, I moved my brush around in little circles and squiggles. I kept the deepest colour marks to the sides of her hair and washed my brush out a little when adding a few marks to the top of her hair where I'm keeping the highlight. I'll be honest and say I'm not good at skin tones, which is why you'll see me going back into this area again and again, adding another layer here, some warmer colours there. But having said that, I think these layers add to the look of skin tones. We aren't all one colour, and although I don't want to go hyper-realistic with my painting, I do want that nod to what we actually see. Our hair and faces have dozens of different colours, shadows and highlights, and so basically I'm trying to justify why I kept fiddling with this piece. For the skin, I used a range of different colours. Transparent red oxide and raw umber added much of the depth of colour, which I tried to keep to the sides of the face with a highlight over the middle of the face which matched the one in her hair. For warmth, I brought in touches of Quinacridone Gold and Aussie Red Gold. I did try and keep the eyelids a little lighter too, as I felt they would be catching the light. I debated whether to add makeup, and I was imagining the fabulous job Kathy Rakusin would do with this. However, as I struggle with people and skin tones at the best of times, I think this would be a step too far for me. And I thought anyway that seeing as this stamp set was all about rest and self-care, that she would already have taken her makeup off. I'm continuing to build the layers on each area, coming in with darker colour with one brush and then sweeping that colour out over the area and diluting it as I do with a second clean damp brush. I use this two brush method a lot and I often get asked about it. I'll try and remember to film a specific part in a video at some point. However, the basis of it is that if you use just one brush, you are continuously washing your watercolour pigment into your water jar as you change colours or want to use a damp brush to pull colour out, as I've just mentioned. However, if you use two brushes, you keep one brush loaded with a concentrated mix of colour, and brush two you keep with clean clear water to pull colour out and dilute it. This way, while you're working with one colour of paint, you only need to wash brush two, which has minimal pigment on it. Brush one stays loaded with paint and ready to go, and you don't wash this away unless you want to change colour. You'll have noticed that I added another layer to the hair, and this time I used Lunar Black for more curls and squiggles. I'm slowly building up the layers and depth, but you still see the underlying layers, which help to give the hair life and the impression of curls. Although I've added a few marks to the highlight on the hair, I've always made sure to use a more dilute mix, and so this area still has character while being lighter than the sides. As I mentioned earlier, by the time I came to add the colour for her cheeks, the lines I'd originally stamped had completely disappeared. I debated whether to try and paint the ovals for her cheeks in, but wasn't confident I'd get them in the right place. And so instead I added a gentle glow to the whole of the cheek area by bringing in a dilute Pyrrole Crimson and then using a damp brush to soften the edges and blend the pink into the rest of the skin. For the last layer to her hair, I used the same black Pigma Micron pen that I originally used to draw in the features of her face. This adds that final depth and dimension, and again I kept to squiggly marks to denote the curls in her hair. To sharpen up some of the lines and add more depth and shading to the shadows, I used a sepia Faber-Castell Polychromo pencil. This is my favourite colour as it's dark enough to use for the shadows, but not as harsh as black. And if I had to take one away with me travelling, then of all the Polychromo pencils, I'd choose sepia. I carried on fiddling a little more as you do, and then finally called it done and placed it back into the MISTI. I lined up one of the sentiments from the set, and I'm guessing this is Christina's handwriting, and I stamped it in Nocturne ink. I had to stamp it a couple of times to get a good impression on the textured watercolour card. I then trimmed the panel slightly and added a generous amount of foam adhesive to the back and mounted it to an A2 card base cut and scored from Fog card. I squeeze Nuvo droplets onto a slick craft mat, let them dry and then peel them off and keep them in this tin as a quick and easy embellishment. I use droplets in honeysuckle and pink orchid and kept them in place with Gina K Connect glue. And that completes his card using the new Rest Queen set with a look at how to watercolour curly hair. I'll leave links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used today, as well as a link to the coordinating blog post over at limedutydesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to get notified when a new video is out, don't forget to hit the bell button next to the subscribe button too. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.